Chapter 6. What Miss Bowzer Knew. "Guess what?" Uncle Jack said. He was speaking on the phone to Miss Bailey. He winked and smiled down at me. "You don't have to heat cinnamon in the oven anymore. My niece, the one, many say, so tragically orphaned by that storm," he winked at me again, and I rolled my eyes, "likes to bake cinnamon rolls, and I thought, hey, why not bake them while we show Miss Bailey's house? That's right, Miss Bailey, you won't need to bother with the cinnamon anymore. Baking is a homey smell, you bet. Absolutely. You should research these things before you try to sell your house. And listen, Miss Bailey, afterward, I'm going to leave the rolls for you. You're quite welcome. I'll call you when I have someone to look at the house." He hung up, beaming. "Well," I said, "I guess baking rolls will smell better than burning spices." "We're not going to bake the rolls at her house, Primrose," said Uncle Jack. "We're going to bring them over already baked, in a pan covered in foil so she can't see that they're baked. We can leave them on top of the stove for her. She'll never even know the oven wasn't turned on." "Won't she suspect something when she comes in and the house doesn't smell like anything?" "With a pan of rolls sitting right there, why would she suspect anything?" said Uncle Jack. "And without that overwhelming noxious smell, I'm sure I can sell the house right away." I tried to teach myself to make cinnamon rolls, but I had never had to use yeast before. Miss Perfidy's cookbook made it sound easy, but yeast, as it turned out, was not a sure thing. In fact, I grumbled after the third day of dumping unrisen roll, recipe with rising advice to follow, in the garbage. The only sure thing about yeast is that it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. "Don't you have anyone you could ask about this?" said Uncle Jack when he got home and saw the garbage can full of rejects. "Any friends? Any mothers of friends?" I hadn't told Uncle Jack about Miss Bowzer teaching me to boil potatoes. I didn't know why, except that he kept making such nasty remarks about a restaurant. But surely she knew about yeast. I nodded. It was time to stop saying abracadabra over the yeast bowl and time to get help. The next day, after school, I knocked on the kitchen door of the girl on the red swing. Miss Bowzer was smoking and making waffles. I showed her the bowl with the yeast just lying there, and Miss Bowzer took a puff of her cigarette and dumped the whole thing down the sink. "What's the matter with people these days?" she said. "Don't teach children anything. Kids can't tell time, tell left from right, make change, tie their shoes until they're teenagers practically. Your mother never teach you to cook?" I thought about my mother. Mostly, my mother sat in the kitchen with her feet propped up on the stove, listening to violin music and reading. If I don't learn how to make cinnamon rolls, I can't go with Uncle Jack after school. And if I can't go with Uncle Jack, I'll be either arrested for shoplifting, teased because I don't believe my parents are dead, or, "I'll tell you what's dead, your yeast," said Miss Bowzer, who was good at getting to the point. "And why would anyone want to go anywhere with your uncle anyway? That's what I'd like to know." "Uncle Jack?" I said in surprise. "What's wrong with him?" "Plenty. Trying to pitch people out of their homes, making the town so expensive no one but rich people can afford to live here anymore, wanting to buy me out. Huh!" She snorted and proceeded to teach me everything there was to know about yeast. I had gotten the yeast from Mr. Hardy's store, and apparently he didn't bother to check the date on it. "I didn't even know yeast had an expiration date," I said. "There's a lot of stuff you need to know to be able to cook." "Not so much. I started when I was just slightly younger than you. Who knows? Maybe someday you'll end up with a rival restaurant in Coal Harbor someday. "I want to travel like Miss Honeycutt first, though," I said, munching on the waffle Miss Bowzer handed me. "What do you want to do that for?" asked Miss Bowzer, looking down at me out of squinty eyes. "I want to go places where important things happen to you," I said. "Why?" drawled Miss Bowzer. "So I'll know more," I said. "Huh," snorted Miss Bowzer. "Some people see the whole world and don't know anything. Take this uncle of yours. I bet he's been around the block a few times. Now let's see how this yeast is doing. There, just like I said, if your water temperature's right and your yeast hasn't expired, you've got nothing to worry about." I looked at the yeast, which was bubbling, while Miss Bowzer went back to airing her views on Uncle Jack. "He's already bought out the cantinas, those spineless jellyfish. You know that?" I didn't, but I couldn't help but be happy about that. and some big, soulless drugstore that doesn't know you and doesn't care is moving in. I didn't see how that was going to be worse than the cantinas, who did know you and didn't care, but I didn't say anything because I liked Miss Bowzer, and she was a lot prettier than I first thought. At first glance, she was kind of ordinary looking, middle-aged and plump with a ring of blonde, fussy hair around her head. But when I studied her up close, I saw that she had eyes like shimmering green islands. "You ever been married?" I asked her as we labored over the dough. "Nah," she said. She took a drag of her cigarette and blew the smoke out in a thin, long tunnel. "I don't settle. When I heard the story of your mom and dad, I said to myself, yeah, that's what I've been waiting for. I want someone who puts the whole ball of wax at risk. I want the kind of marriage where we would follow each other out into the stormy, fatal sea, or I'm not marrying at all." "Wow," I said, but added, "It wasn't fatal, just stormy." "So you say," said Miss Bowzer, and took another drag of her cigarette. My mother smoked too, but I guess by now she had quit the habit, which was, I suppose, one of the advantages of being shipwrecked. I used to poke pinholes in all her cigarettes because I had read somewhere that when you do that, the smoker can't inhale. I did it because I didn't want my mother to get lung cancer and die, but when she found out it was me doing it, and I denied it as long as I could, she got very angry and wasn't touched at all by my concern. And then the storm thing came up, so I guess you can't really protect people anyhow, or if you protect them from one thing, up and comes another. Miss Bowzer showed me how to mix the other ingredients for the cinnamon rolls and knead the dough. As I pounded it on a floured board, turning at a quarter turn each time with the heels of my hands as instructed, I say, "What do you mean, so you say," when I said the shipwreck wasn't fatal? "I didn't mean anything. Believe what you will believe," said Miss Bowzer, peering over my shoulder, cigarette ash perilously close to the dough. "Didn't you ever believe anything just because you knew it was true?" I asked. "Nah," said Miss Bowzer. Then she got a faraway look in her eye. "Of course, there was the time I knew about the whaling ship." She stopped puffing and put her cigarette out absently. "That was back when I was a little girl. My father's whaling ship was going out to sea the next day, and the night before I woke up in the middle of the night covered in sweat and just scared. I was just scared for no reason at all. I sat up for an hour and shivered in my attic room in the dark, wanting to tell my mother, but I had nothing to tell. We had a house down by the docks, and I could hear the waves crashing. Usually it was a sound that calmed me, but that night it made me more fearful. I was pretty sure I hadn't had a nightmare. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but it was as if the air was charged with waiting, like something awful was going to happen. The next day, when my father was about to leave, I awoke early and went downstairs and clung to his leg. I was never up that early in the morning, and my father thought I had gone out of my mind. I begged him to stay home with me. I cried and cried. He kept trying to shake me off and pass me off to my mother, but I wouldn't let go. Then he did an odd thing. He turned to my mother and said, "I'll stay home today, Kathleen." Well, this was my father, who never missed a day's work since he had started on the whaling ships 30 years before, as a boy. My mother nodded and went down to the docks herself to tell the crew my father was ill. She couldn't give any other explanation. That afternoon, a terrible storm arose, and the whaling ship got wrecked on the west coast by Tofino. Regular graveyard for ships it is over there. Everyone went down with the ship. I'll never forget that year. Whole town in mourning. If we'd had known what was to happen, we would have tried to keep the whole crew from going out that day, though doubtless no one would have believed me. The day had started clear and fine with no storm warnings. My parents never said a word to me, not one word about it. I don't know if they were scared by it or if they didn't want to scare me. I felt so terrible and responsible that I blurted it all out to my aunt weeks later, and she said, "We all live in worlds seen and unseen." I shivered. "Suppose your father hadn't believed you?" "Yes, suppose," said Miss Bowzer in a queer voice. Then we formed the dough into rolls, and Miss Bowzer lent me a pan to take them home in. "You bake them in your own oven. That way you can eat them while they're hot. Nothing like cinnamon rolls out of the oven. Now you come on over after school sometime, and I'll find other things for us to cook." Another good chapter. We got to know a little bit more about Miss Bowzer. Today, as your response, I'd like you to summarize the chapter. So, in brief, tell me what happened in the chapter. 1 to 3 sentences. And our recipe. Cinnamon rolls. This is kind of a tricky recipe. I would master caramel apples and a few other things before moving on to cinnamon rolls. First, check your yeast and make sure the expiration date hasn't come and gone. Then, pour a quarter cup of lukewarm water into a mixing bowl and put a teaspoon of sugar into it. It is the sugar that gets the yeast all excited. Put 2 teaspoons of yeast into the sugar water and let it fizz up for 10 minutes. If it doesn't get all excited but just lies there like mud, dump it and start over. Add 2 large beaten eggs, 1/2 cup of milk, 1/2 cup of sugar, 1/2 cup of flour, and 1 teaspoon vanilla. Mix this up. Then, stir in 2.5 cups of flour. Put the mixture on a floured surface and knead 1 stick of soft butter into the dough. This is a messy business. To knead anything, turn the dough 1/4 turn, fold it in half toward yourself, and kind of pound it down and forward with the heel of your hands. When it seems to be getting sticky, throw more flour on it. You keep doing this endlessly, it seems, or for about 10 minutes, whatever comes first. Put the dough in a buttered bowl, cover it with a cloth, and let it rise until doubled in bulk. Then pinch it down, roll it out, and spread the dough with melted butter. Sprinkle sugar and cinnamon all over it until it's covered, and then roll it up into a tube. Slice it so you have about 1-inch pieces. Then put these on a baking sheet and cover with a cloth and let rise again. Bake it in a 350-degree oven for about half an hour or so. Take powdered sugar and butter and milk. Miss Bowzer didn't give me clear directions on this. She just said, mix it up so it looks like icing, and I did, using about a 1/4 cup butter, 2 cups of sugar, and a few drops of milk. But she said proportions here aren't crucial. Spread it in little gobs over the hot cinnamon rolls. It will melt all over them and be completely delicious.